Well,
Great.
Well, then welcome to the New Mexico Library Association's Library Legislative Briefing. We sadly cannot assemble in the legislature and show the flag there, but this is our way of conveying how we get stuff out of the legislature. And our prospects this year are pretty good. And so we're going to hear from all of the types of libraries and from others who will illuminate how we work the legislature and get the help that we need. And so I'm going to start by calling on Dean Smith, the president of the New Mexico Library Association, and to welcome us and get started. Dean?
Well, good morning. Welcome, everybody. I always like it when it's a double screen on Zoom, but then I can't find anybody. So, but it's a good show. So I'm, as Joe said, I'm the president of the New Mexico Library Association for this year. And then I want to introduce Kate Alderete. I saw her name someplace there. She's the vice president, and she's the one that will be putting on the conference, which is one of the two major things that the New Mexico Library Association takes on. She has a very exciting theme set up for this year. I'm going to plug it first. The theme that Kate and her program committee have come up with is all about sustainability, and it's called Library Strong. That conference, please put it in your date books, is going to be October 27th and 28th. That's the Thursday and Friday at the Marriott Pyramid in Albuquerque. Now, the other critical thing that the Library Association does, of course, is what we're here for today, which is advocacy. And obviously, Library Legislative Day is a keystone of that whole work. But I also need to say that for every minute that we spend on Library Legislative Day, beyond this meeting, out in the halls and talking to legislators and emailing today, for every minute of today, there's hours of work been done by all sorts of people. All of us involved have to be involved in it to make this work. Of course, the major thing that we'll talk about today is the state GO bonds, which happen every 2 years and are so critical to all types of libraries, public, academic, tribal, and school libraries in providing material funding so that we can continue to purchase books and databases and CDs, etc. But there's all sorts of other legislation, which we'll hear about today. There's legislation that affects public libraries, like encouraging that we have, strong funding for state grants and aid. There's legislation that affects school libraries, like, promoting doing a study of the impact of having a school librarian, a professional school librarian in that school. We'll hear about academic library legislation. There's tribal library legislation. And of course, the other thing that the Library Association does is work to support the state library to make sure that they have the tools and resources that they need to help support all of us. One of the things that's happened with that the Library Association helped support was, to advocate for funding for a new bookmobile when they go down. They're not cheap. So all of this is important. We all have to be involved. But as much as I said, there's hours of work by all of us to make this happen, I have to say that there are, for any hour that any of us have spent, Joe Sabatini has spent many more hours. And we wouldn't be here, and we wouldn't be as far as we are. We wouldn't be looking forward to such an amazing year if it wasn't for Joe. So thank you.
You're welcome. That's fun.
I
can't help it.
It is. Well, we're so lucky that you like it and that it's fun. Have we got everybody that we're supposed to have here?
Well, I'm looking for Greg Geisler from the DCA, the Department of Cultural Affairs, was going to give a welcome and describe their programs. I'm not. I don't see him in yet, so we can then go next to me and Kate and Omar. Omar, are you here yet? Okay, so
there. Okay, and I sent you the.
All right. Well, I'm going to start with the general obligation bond issue for 2022, which was introduced as House Bill 137 yesterday, and incredibly enough, it's at $19 million in the bill as posted, which is what we came up with. It's double the amount that the legislature passed in 2020, and that was a disappointment, as it was a reduction from the 2018 bond of 12.75 million. And all of you are affected by that reduction, and so we made the case that it needed to be more. And the state's way of calculating the general obligation bonds, is based on keeping a steady millage rate, and what they repay from bonds 10 years ago, plus what the property valuations are, determines the pot, which in previous years was in the $150 to $200 million range. Well, property values have gone up quite a bit, and bonds that retired created more capacity. When we started looking at it, it was 218 million for the three things that they bond for regularly: senior centers, academic library construction, or academic construction, and libraries. Their capacity is in the $242 million range. So there was plenty of money to work with, and the legislature was not inclined to add a fourth item that was suggested, about $50 million worth of environmental projects. So we come in at double what we had in the previous year, and that's what we need to be advocating to our legislatures. Tell them at the $19 million rate, which is $6 million each for academic, public school libraries, and $1 million for tribal libraries. Again, that is, each of them are double what there was in the 2020 bond. And I'm sure you all will somehow find a way to spend that effectively and deliver good product to your customers. And that's what this is all about, is delivering a solid product that you can identify. Plus, as you talk to your legislators, you can say, here's what we were able to do with this to cope with the pandemic and still maintain an effective level of service in this time of crisis. So I'm gonna ask Kate Alderete, who was with me and along with April Kent, who was there as well. On October 27th, we had the honor of being asked to testify briefly on the library's needs for the bond issue, and so that was an interesting experience. So I'm going to hand it over to Kate to describe her impressions of it and how the bonds are helpful in her particular library and how she ran her bond money well. Kate?
Hi, everyone. So my name is Kate Alderete. I'm the director of the Taos Public Library in Taos, New Mexico. That's District 42. I'm also the vice president of the New Mexico Library Association. So my legislators are Representative Cristina Ortiz and Senator Bobby Gonzalez. So yeah, as far as in October, I think we all left with positive impressions of what was going to happen with the funding. And obviously that is what happened in the Legislative Finance Committee meeting that just passed with the 19 million being recommended in the House bill. So always a positive experience to be able to mingle with legislators, to be able to walk up to my particular legislator and tell him who I am and let him know that the library and being funded by the GEO bond is important. I prepared a couple of things that I'll kind of read off, so you'll see my eyes look up at my screen. So Joe did ask me to briefly touch on my impressions of that meeting, but I also kind of wanted to make a few comments on the last meeting that we all saw. Hopefully most of us did. And it is hard to find fault when you get what you ask for. But of course, there is one statement I think that was heard around the world, or at least around the library world here in New Mexico. And it sent a signal to me that even though we got what we asked for within the Finance Committee, we still have a long way to go in advocating not only for what we need, but what we do as professional librarians. So without getting too much into the weeds on that, most of us know, if we saw it, a claim was made regarding print materials. And of course, the committee member couldn't cite a source, which is just bad form when you're talking to and about libraries. But the question was posed, who is looking at what goes into the library? And so the answer there, of course, we all know is, well, we are. The professional librarians of New Mexico are looking at how that money is being allocated. So while GeoBond is used in many libraries, including my own for analog acquisitions, the reality is that a library isn't just a pile of books. And we've all known that for decades. So my library has traditionally used GeoBond funds to ensure that our technology like desktop computers and self-checkout machines are up to date and useful to our patrons. And of course, COVID has presented unique challenges in how we deliver services to our communities. So during the pandemic, my library purchased laptops. So when people come into the library and don't feel comfortable sitting near someone else at a public computer kiosk, they can move freely around the library and still be able to access the internet on a device that we provide to them. And I realized that providing laptops is nothing new to public libraries, but it was new to us. So childcare issues have also popped up all over the world, and we are still not fully, those are still not fully resolved. So we also recently, using GeoBond funds, purchased iPads and makerspace equipment with the idea that we can run some solid educational, free and safe after school programs for our working parents. So the impact of funding is obviously tangible. Those of us who've been in administrative positions and spend that money know that it is. A healthy library in a community is no longer supplemental, which tends to be the key word that we all go to. It's absolutely necessary. So communicating to our legislators what we do, what we need to do it, and how the GeoBond bridges that gap for libraries all around the state is paramount, and just not just in election cycles. Of course, getting in touch with your legislators, if you have the opportunity to sit in on any of the actual floor legislation, 100% do it. It's good experience anyway. Get in touch with them, let them know who you are, invite them to your library. And when you get them there, show them the impact of the GEO bond specifically in your own institution. So lastly, I would encourage you all, if you haven't already, and I know we have a couple of consortiums going on, but to get in touch with your library neighbors. The best thing about librarians, and that bridges the space between public, school, tribal, and academic libraries, is that we all have each other's backs. So creating healthy libraries isn't something we can do alone. I have to remind that to myself all the time that it's not just me against the world, it's me and a whole team of people against the world. There's an amazing group of professional librarians throughout New Mexico who will all have the same goal, and that's to create a legacy of lasting, healthy, and useful libraries throughout the state.
Thanks, Kate. And I know I shared the comments of the Senator Schauer, but we don't want to dump on it anybody. It's our job to educate these people who, you know, if we went into he's a small business owner in Farmington, and we don't know the fine details of how he runs his store either. So going to our legislators and explaining bringing them up to date about how a 21st century library operates with, you know, like non-print media as being an ever increasing portion of what we circulate. That's just part of our regular job, and I'm betting that Karen McPeters in Farmington will gently explain to him the realities. I know I've seen a video on their website in Farmington where she explains it all, and so it's sharing how we do what we do and how that delivers the product. So I'm going to now call on Omar Durant, who has been the Bonds for Libraries Special Interest Group Chair, and he'll describe what happens after we get our $19 million bond issue. Omar?
Good morning to everybody. I'd like to say that we've been working very hard at reconstructing our website. The website, which we've had for a number of years, virtually disappeared, literally virtually disappeared over the last year or so. And thanks to Robin Gleasner and April, I know you've worked with her on this also, managed to find a lot of the items that were on our previous website, so we didn't have to start totally from scratch, but they put a lot of hours in to get the website up and running again. And before I go any farther, the website address is similar to the old one, but it's a little bit longer, and it's NM Bonds with an S for libraries .wildapricot.org. And what we've done is been able to piggyback off of the web service that NMLA uses and reconstruct our website there. So that'll be posted on the NMLA website, and also you can access it directly. The intent of the website is to get information out to folks who might be looking at for ideas for promoting the GEO bond in their communities with their library patrons, and also the businesses and others in their community. We have 2 or 3 parts to it, and one of the parts is that we're asking for folks, which we have in the past, to submit photographs of programs they might be having that are successful, to give us ideas for ways to promote the GO bond, so that a lot of the information comes from the librarians in the state themselves. As Joe had said, we're going to be posting not only the amounts that we're asking for, but also already on the website are estimates for what individual counties and municipalities might look for getting from the GO bond, so that people can start planning ahead and using that information when they speak with people in their communities. So the website is going to be one of our main ways of contacting people. You know, in years past, we did all kinds of mailings, as Joe can attest, because we've sat around a table more than once with stacks of envelopes and bumper stickers and stickers and posters and all kinds of things. And that's just not the way the world really works anymore. But we're hoping that all of you can encourage folks to go to the website. It's still a work in progress. It's not everything that we want to have there is up yet, but it's really looking good. And so that's one of the ways we're going to be communicating with folks. Also, we do have an email address where people can contact us with it, asking questions, and my name and email address are also on the website. So if someone wants to contact us, asking for information, looking for support, they can contact me, and then I can work with any of you that it applies to. So that's in general where we are with this, and we're very excited about getting things up and running on the internet again.
Thanks, Omar. I should be introducing you all. Omar is retired from a long career at the Albuquerque Public Schools, and we're grateful for him taking on the Bonds for Libraries special interest group again, and looking forward to the campaign.
Great. I want to make a note here, Joe. In the chat is the link to the New Mexico Bonds for Libraries, if anyone is looking for that link.
Thanks, Lynette. And we'll be publicizing that in the legislative bulletins as well, which is the way we communicate over time on both the legislative and once we get past that, the campaign issues. Okay, I'm going to now call on Shell okay.
Nymark.
Nymark, forgive me. Shell is a board member at the Embudo Valley Library and has been at that for more than a decade, and has initiated the idea of supporting our smaller rural libraries with additional help that they need just to survive and keep the doors open. So Shell, I will ask you to talk about the Rural Library Endowment.
Okay, thank you, Joe, and thank you, everybody, for being here and for advocating for our libraries throughout the state. So right now, the endowment has $3 million in it. It's in the budget for an additional $10 million if we get that, which I think we will. Each rural library, 51 rural libraries throughout the state, will be receiving about $12,000 a year from the endowment. Senator Jerry Ortiz-Pino submitted SB 149 to add an additional $10 million over that to the endowment. If we get that, each library would be getting about $22,000 a year from the endowment. And that's a game changer for many of the libraries. There are 6 libraries in the state, 6 public libraries open at least 25 hours a week that are operating under $10,000 a year. So you can imagine what a game changer that will be. They're volunteers mostly in those libraries. Another 16 libraries in the state are operating under $50,000 a year. I've been talking to a lot of the rural librarians and library directors this week, and their greatest needs are for staffing. Some of these volunteer libraries would hire staff with endowment money once it starts getting bumped up to the $12,000 or $20,000 amount. Other libraries are suffering from infrastructure problems, crumbling infrastructure, lack of space. They need to bring their libraries up to ADA standards. One of the libraries, one of the Pueblo libraries I spoke to said that their issue is having reliable recurring funds for staffing. So they'll get a grant one year, the next year it's gone, and they can't keep staffing going. The need is great among these libraries, and the services they're providing are incredible. They also need funds for IT, for programming needs for children. One of the libraries I spoke to this week wants to have field trips for their summer reading program. They said the people in town, can't even come up with $5 for entrance to White Sands or the Space Museum, which are near this library. So these poverty-stricken communities just need the help so much that the endowment will be able to provide. So the first committee that SB 149 is going to, it's not scheduled yet, but it's the Indian Rural Cultural Affairs Committee. Senators Shendo, O'Neill, Griggs, Joshua Sanchez, and Pinto are on that committee. Any advocacy, any contacts to those committees would be great. After that, it will go to the Senate Finance Committee. So I would hope that all of you would consider supporting Senate Bill 149 and talking to you senators, and also speaking with the governor's office is crucial on any of these issues that we're supporting. So thank you. If you have any questions, let me know.
Okay, thank you, Shell. I would now call on April Kent to present academic library issues. April is at New Mexico Highlands University and is active in the New Mexico Consortium of Academic Libraries, their legislative committee. Over to you, April.
All right, perfect, thank you. From the academic library perspective, and I see a lot of other academic librarians on here, so if I miss anything, please chime in. Our main concern this year is the GO Bond B, of course, and to help advocate for this, all of our members have been sent copies of our main talking points. We always emphasize inflation is one of the biggest things that gets us in terms of providing resources. We do highlight on our talking points and on our all of our documents a lot of the STEM H needed materials because they are some of the most expensive, and some of them have seen just huge jumps recently. We have, in addition to providing it to academic librarians and directors to go and advocate to our senators and representatives, we have sent all that material to them electronically, and our NMCAL president, Valerie Nye, also on that, has braved the storm today to deliver print copies of our talking points, our newsletter, a letter of thank you, and of course, thank you chocolate to the Roundhouse this morning to make sure that hopefully when they're sitting in their desk, they can flip through and see some of these points. Another thing I wanted to touch on was one thing we were asked to prepare by Steve Olson, who at the time was with the LFC, was one question we get a lot from legislators is exactly what do academic libraries do with their materials? We all know we do a lot more than just books, and they want to know exactly how we spend it. And this is one thing they request for a lot of capital projects. So I'm going to put this into chat, but we did a survey of how GeoBond beam funds were spent by academic libraries. So we have 4 main buckets or categories we're allowed to spend from. So we asked our member libraries, and we got a very high rate of return of the 30 state-supported academic libraries of how that money is supported. And I'm very happy to send this to anybody else who are at any library. And this might be something that public libraries, school libraries, and tribal libraries consider doing, because it is something that legislators do ask for. And it's great to have that data and show what it is. The other thing we frequently have been asked from LFC staff and HED staff is to define what we are, like what the different terms mean. And I know, because I'm an academic librarian, I always think of new legislators like our new students. It's like, I just explained how to do an academic paper, and I have to explain to brand new 18-year-olds or transfer students. So it's the same thing. It always happens when you get those new legislators or legislators from now like asking about libraries. Same thing with the new administrators. You have to educate them and explain online journals are not free. Online journals are not less expensive than print ones, and all those other important points, and continue to advocate for that. I am going to pause right now and see if Valerie has anything to add, and to thank her again for braving the storm for a very weird roundhouse experience.
Thank you, April, for presenting NMCAL's information. I don't have anything to add except a big thank you to the Legislative Committee in NMCAL that works year-round to support these initiatives and make sure that our legislators are educated about the things that are of greatest concern to us. So thank you for all your work.
Okay, thank you. I'm looking now. I don't think Larry Haran has joined us. And
I'm here, Joe.
Oh, there he is. Okay, here's one now. Larry
I'm
Haran.
hiding amongst the group of 53.
Okay. Because the way things work at the legislature, it's always wonderful surprise time, and hey, your bill is up. Oh, I mean now, and so.
Morning, Larry.
Good morning.
One's life as a legislative advocate is filled with change,
chaos and uncertainty.
And so,
which is why I love it. Thanks, Joe.
So Larry has inherited being our legislative advocate from his father Tom, and we cherish Tom as well. And so, okay, go ahead. What's going on, and how do we play it? And
thanks, Jonah. I apologize since I had to just jump on late if you've already covered some of this stuff. But I'll run through. For us, 30-day sessions are always more significant than 60-day sessions, because that's when the general obligation bond is introduced and passed. And I think April was talking about, I think, some of that, and I caught kind of the tail end of what you talked about. But the 30-day session, just for those, always as a reminder, is limited to budget matters, so revenues, appropriations, and then special messages from the governor. So the legislators are limited in what they can consider. The midpoint of the session is next Wednesday at noon, so February 2nd at noon. The reason that date is of significance is that's the last day for bill introduction. So by the end of Wednesday, all of the legislation will have been introduced, with an exception, and that is certain legislators get, essentially what they do is they introduce a whole bunch of titles that say relating to the public peace, health, safety, and welfare, and they can those are called dummy bills. They can substitute those bills later on in the session. So there are always ways to introduce new bills, but for the most part, next Wednesday will be the last day for that introduction. They're really focused on the budget and how to spend all of this, all of the excess revenue that the state has. And there are also a lot of discussion on the federal infrastructure package and how they're going to spend that. That's about $3.7 billion. Marty Chavez is spearheading that effort, although I did see that Bianca Wertheim Ortiz is now going to be running that effort. That was today. And so there's a lot of local governments and everybody is trying to figure out how to get to the trough and get as much of that funding available as they can. For libraries specifically, in the special session, there was 10 million allocated for tribal libraries and broadband. And so for those members of our tribal library community, they're trying to figure out how they're going to allocate those funds. And so that's an additional pot of funding that's been available for tribal libraries. And there's also potential for funding through all of that infrastructure money. So for us and issues we're dealing with lack of funding and lack of libraries, we have a shot to get some increased funding. And the other piece that we are always interested in is broadband. And as I'm sure you're all aware, that's a big topic of discussion. And there's a lot of money they're putting into broadband for statewide broadband. And part of the story that is important to the legislators for us when we're dealing with advocacy. And when we talk about advocating, I always say you have to have an argument or you have to have a good story to convince legislators to help with our issues. Is as we went through the pandemic and kids were trying to get educated online and we have lack of broadband, libraries really became centers of learning and access to the internet. And so I think it's important for us to continue to tell that story. The challenge that I run into just in dealing with legislators continues to be that anecdotal issue of who uses libraries anymore because they think they can get everything on a Kindle and they don't need to go in and use books. And so we have to continue spreading our story and advocating for libraries. And you all do that very effectively. It's harder this session and last session to do it because you can get access to the building now, but there's not a whole lot of people there. So the legislators are in the Capitol. The Senate is actually having everything in person. So their committee hearings are in person and their floor sessions, but they have some members who are participating virtually. They have included an element of a virtual element in all their committee hearings. The way you do it if you want to participate is you go onto the legislative website, you find the committee schedule that you're looking for, and at the bottom of their agenda, there will always be a Zoom link. It's a hyperlink. You click on it. Once it gets to you, once it gets to that bill, they'll ask for support or opposition, and you just use the raise your hand function. It's a lot easier than it was last session. And so if you do want to testify in bills and you can't make it up here, I urge you to look at that and you can see and participate that way. The House, their floor sessions are in person, but their committees are completely virtual. So they are not in the committee room having a hearing. So if you want to participate, you have to participate virtually when it comes to the House. But you can get in the Capitol. If you want to come up, you can get in. You have to be fully vaccinated and boosted or fit one of their exceptions with a negative test within the last 48 hours. Can't carry any firearms. So now you have to go through a metal detector. So you literally go through a checkpoint where they'll look at your vaccination card, your ID, and then you have to go through a metal detector. There's really not very many people. I'm surprised there's not many people in the Capitol because I missed it so much. I'm sure I'm there all day, every day, just because I don't trust to do it any other way. But there's even very few people of my ilk are there all the time. So in some ways it's good because you have a lot of easier access to legislators. But for you all, if you're not comfortable with that, you don't want to do that, or you just can't, you still need to be able to access your legislators. And so the best way is always in person. Next, if you can get on a Zoom or something like that with them, or text or cell phone. If we want to get information to them, I highly recommend that if you're going to email it to them, you also reach out to their assistants and maybe provide information to them, because legislators get thousands of emails a day and it is easy to get lost. So if you want information, the best way is still to have hard copies delivered to the Capitol, put in their mailboxes so that they actually get to see them. But you just have to hit, you know, with all the virtual options, I hit, you know, I try every way imaginable to try and get my message to them. And if you have a personal relationship with them, call them, you know, text them on their cell phone and have, you know, make your pitch what we normally would do in the roundhouse. There's a couple of things I'll go over. I've flagged for us, and Joe, you've probably already talked about it, or someone. The GO bond bill has been introduced, and libraries are in it for a total of $19 million. And since Joe, we got an exclamation point when you sent out the update, I assume we're happy that we have a good amount in there. And that's $6 million for public K through 12, and $6 million each for public K through 12 higher ed, and $1 million for tribal libraries. And then there's also separate legislation related to funding for tribal libraries that has been introduced by Representative Lente. So there's a lot of kind of funding in play for members of our association. And then also I keep an eye on all the broadband stuff, because I think it's an important opportunity for us to tap into. And also, and Shell, I don't want to, I think you've already talked about it, but the Rural Libraries Endowment Fund has an appropriations bill. I don't know if that's going to be in the budget or not yet, or how much it's going to be, but that's also still in play. So lots of things going on about, you know, positive efforts and funding for libraries. Again, I encourage you to use the interim period to meet the legislators whose constituents you serve, bring them into your library, show them what you do. So then they start to tell your story for you when they get up there on the committee. And that's, I think I'll answer any questions you all may have, or Joe, if there's anything else you want me to cover.
Yes. Lynette is watching the chat. And are there any questions in the chat for Larry?
So Tracy didn't have a question, but she said that kids still want physical books. I'm like, I must be like a kid, because not only that, I still want physical bills. So I still carry around my hard copy of the bills, and I don't trust the online ones. So I'm the same way.
We have a lot of families coming into public libraries getting books for their kids. That has not ended. So if they're not available to get something in the school library for some reason, because of the pandemic issues, they are coming into a public library to get what they need also. So, which is good.
So apparently there are not questions in the chat. I think Shell raised his hand.
Shell's raising his hand.
Yeah, so I was wondering, when you say we can text legislators, are those only ones that we happen to know their personal phone numbers, or is there some list of numbers where we can text people?
If you look online where it says find your legislator and you click on a particular legislator, it will list their phone number. If it's a 986 number, that's their Capitol office. If it's something otherwise, most of them now, used to be those would be home phones, but most of them now, that's a cell phone. So that's where you can look.
Thank you.
You know, the other trick is Google them, and if they have a campaign website, most of them have their cell phones on their campaign website.
Thank you so much.
Well, if we don't have any questions, Joe, it means I bored everybody to death, or I covered everything. I bet it's the first.
I just respond, the exclamation point after the 19 million is, I'm dancing in the street. If we, you know, if they cut it to 16.5, I'd still be dancing in the street. 19 is double 9.5. Do the math. It's, and the, you know, everybody's got a hope chest of, if I had more money that I can apply the way that we can use the bond issue, here's what I would do. And that's always a telling point. If I only had X plus Y, then here are the additional things that we will provide to our community, our customers, our students. So there we are. And Larry, we're always appreciative of your being able to get you know where the rooms are that we don't, and you can even get into those rooms in those special times late at night when they're doing the real, the real carve up of the budget and the like. So we always appreciate your efforts and letting us know when we need to get our messages in, but that's right now. So thank you, and we'll be in touch.
Thanks, Joe. And just one more thing to think of. So all the House members are up for re-election this year, as is the governor. So if we want to try, and it's a good time to invite those members they like to do that kind of stuff when they're running. So if you want to invite them to your library and then they get photo ops, that's great, because it works for all of us. And it's also something to think about if the governor's going to be in the community, to get her into the library, especially if you have programs that are running at the time, and she probably would like that. So just consider it any way we can get them in and educate them going forward. It's good for us. So thanks everybody. And I'll keep you updated. It looks like a question.
Yeah, it's kind of a question. This is Tracy from the Albuquerque Public Schools. So the school advocacy for libraries is always, it's kind of twofold in that we've got teacher educator bills. There's a big bill, the governor put forward her initial proposal with giving all the educators across New Mexico a raise, and obviously we're glad about that. And so I guess Larry, as you do your work too, and the rest of us, how that ties in with the work that we're doing as librarians in general, because like Jason Reynolds said, I think on a late night talk show, somebody said, when are you going to write a book for adults? Well, he said, I'm building the readers that become your patrons. And so my writing is the most important writing. Now, I'm not saying that elementary school librarians are the most important librarians, but we do build the readers that eventually are going to be your patrons. So as you advocate on behalf of your library, I guess try to keep that in mind as part of the advocacy that we're doing, not only for our work, but for the work of educators all across the state. So support those raises in some way or another, because I don't know, Rachel and I are concerned, we're hopeful, but we know that last year was rough and this year might be even rougher, the one that's coming, because enrollment is low in a lot of schools. And our funding is dependent on enrollment. So I'm not sure what we're going to do about that, but it could be that even APS, the biggest district in the state, is going to see adjustments to their librarians possibly. So I don't know, Rachel, if you want to add anything to that. I see Rachel's here now.
No, that was
Tracy,
good.
you have just segued into your segment, your 5-minute segment about reporting on school libraries. So Larry, again, thank you, and we'll be back in touch. But Tracy Nichols is at John Baker Elementary School and is the chair of the school libraries special interest group. So go ahead, please continue, Tracy and Rachel.
Okay, Rachel, did you have something to jump on there?
No, you take it away and just let me know if there's anything I can chime in.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, the big thing is that enrollment's down all over the state. And so like, for example, I am on a waiver right now, and there are probably 10 librarians in APS that are on a waiver because our enrollment's low. If you didn't see in the chat, I got a text or an email from a librarian in Espanol that said, the only money we get is GEO bond money. Apparently, once that got instated, the school slashed all their other funding. So I guess I would encourage you to, as you advocate for your your specific academic library or public library. Maybe if it seems appropriate, or if you have a story that's compelling, to tie in how all of our systems are connected, and that the investments that we make in the schools are will carry forward throughout how we educate and serve the public, regardless of their age level. Right now, we don't have certified full-time school librarians in every school. There are lots of schools, especially out of states, like outstate small districts, that don't have, they have an EA, which that doesn't mean they don't get good services, but they don't have, they aren't paying that person a whole lot of money to try and provide the kind of services that people like Therese Ortiz does in Deming. So, right, like when you've got somebody that has that kind of background and investment and is being compensated, it makes a big difference. Right now, I'm working on connecting all of my students that still reach out to me and encouraging them to write their legislator, because I have high school students that still come back to elementary and say, hey, Ms. Nichols, what are you doing? Well, I'm trying not to lose my job right now. So I feel like I'm kind of the rainy day on the parade. But those are the big things I wanted to bring forward, is that the GEO bond is huge to elementary and middle and high school libraries, public school libraries. And that if it's in your wheelhouse, please support the legislation that's gonna give increases to the educators too, because those are the people that are going to be in those libraries. Yes, Lynette?
There's a question in the chat about the tribal schools. Do they get any of the funding that's part of the Go Bond money that's being?
Oh, Lynette, I may not answer this correctly, and if there's anybody from one of those libraries or from the state library that might know, I think the one that they did not get money from was the School Library Materials Fund, which has not been funded in like 13 years, so nobody gets money from it.
Okay.
I think that's the one that they specifically did not get funding from. But I am not sure about GEO Bond.
I can address
Alana?
This is Alana McGrattan, former librarian, Santa Fe Indian School, and the tribal libraries, the tribal schools do not get money from this if they're BIA. Obviously, public schools do. Anything that's with the public schools, and there are a number of, I think it's 97% of Native American children K-12 are in public schools. But a BIA school or contract school, they don't get money from this fund. Now, unless it's changed, the School Library Materials Act was amended to say publicly funded schools. So if the School Library Materials Act is ever funded again, then these schools would be eligible for funding under that.
Okay. I'm going to transition now to the tribal libraries that our Native American Library Special Interest Group.
Before we make that transition, Joe, may I say something real quickly before we transition?
1 minute, Teresa.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay, thank you. I just wanted to advocate again, yes, for public school libraries. Right now, what we're seeing academically, we're seeing a heavily watered down curriculum, especially at a high school level. And when we have a lot of language acquisition students that are coming across the border, what we're trying to really push is high levels of continued literacy acquisition, because when our students are missing that much curriculum, they at some point can then self-teach if they have high levels of literacy, whether it be in Spanish or English. Those two will translate at some point in that language acquisition. The other thing I would like to say too is, as far as print materials, There are studies out. I will pull those in and send them out to the group if you'd like, that do indicate that students that are in heavy academic settings do prefer print materials where they can actually physically interact with the text. They also do utilize e-resources as well. So thanks. Hope that was a minute.
Thank you, Teresa. Okay, we'll go to the tribal library segment. We are calling on Teresa Naranjo, the Santa Clara Pueblo, and Alana, who has introduced herself, and we have a special guest. Go ahead, Teresa, Alana.
Good morning, everybody. I see Regis on, Regis Pickles. Would you like to make some comments before I start?
Tell them about what bill, quickly about what the bills are. Okay. Or maybe Regis can do that. There's big money at play here.
Thank you, Joseph, and good morning to all of you. And thank you so much for the opportunity. Just to share very briefly, we just got off of a joint House Education Committee and Senate Education Committee. And I think there were a lot voiced in similar ways, our collective frustration that there has been the kind of underfunding in very specific focused areas, and like the widening gap of the lack of our teacher capacity K through 12, the underinvestment of libraries, generally speaking, and librarians as a very significant part of the overall workforce has created the kind of crisis in education as a result of that kind of underfunding across the board. And so for the first time today, I hear what tribal leaders have been saying, what Teresa and Alana and their colleagues have been saying is that, that the underfunding of libraries and librarians as part of our human capacity is creating what the pandemic has exposed with regard to the only places where children in tribal communities, rural communities, and other neighborhoods have to access technology to continue their education. And so the bills that have been introduced currently as a result of tremendous work tied to the Yazzie Martinez landmark decision is now in House Bill 88. There are specific dollars now targeted to build operational budgets for tribal librarians so that the kind of support for after school children needs and summer school by increasing and enhancing these capacities, children who leave home because schools are off the reservation. Once the school day ends, they return to communities that are an hour, 2 hours away, and the school day ends. And unless you have that kind of infrastructure and the capacity to support those children, as the case is for rural children, they lack the kind of support and amenities that are taken for granted everywhere else if you live in the metro. And so monies are delegated or recommended in House Bill 88, and House Bill 89 is a response to legislative inquiries to assess fully the state of tribal libraries, the need for new construction, expansion, renovation. And so there's about a $10 million investment to begin providing planning and design to those tribal communities, 22 nations across the state, so that we begin to develop the planning and design for the kind of appropriate investment in building tribal libraries, education, resource centers, and early childhood development centers in the respective tribal communities throughout the state. But this larger kind of coalition here today of all of you have been very helpful in the alliance that brings this discussion, and the entrance into the general obligation bond for tribal libraries has just been very recent. As a former chief of staff to the late Ben Lujan, the former Speaker of the House, he was instrumental in providing entree into the general obligation bond process for tribal communities for their libraries and programs that, as the previous person spoke, they might be minimal, but in the underfunded programs for tribal libraries, it's a tremendous injection of resources to provide for the operation to be able to provide services to children, adults, and members in our respective communities. So there is a $10 million recommendation that is already secure for House Bill 89 for the first step one in the process to build out new facilities for those communities that currently exist in such dilapidated states and circumstances in makeshift buildings as tribes became available as part of this larger library framework in the state. And appreciate all of you very much for giving voice to those communities, and look so much to our continued collaboration to secure the kind of investments for librarians, for libraries across the state in ways that brings the kind of capacity and program enhancement so direly needed for our respective citizens throughout the entire state and in our respective communities. Thank you so much to all of you.
Thank you, Regis. And I'll call on Teresa and Alana to provide additional information about that. So go ahead, please.
Okay, good morning, and thank you to Regis and to the Leadership Institute and the Tribal Education Alliance for working so diligently over the years to bring the legislation that he's describing forward. We've been located in an old Head Start building for about 45 years. So our space is very small. So we're really we've really been trying to maximize the GEO bond usage in purchasing digital materials to expand the outreach even further. I'm just gonna read off some notes. I'm sorry, I'm not too good at just like on the spot stuff. So I'll just quickly read off my notes. I just wanted to thank Representative Chandler and the NMLA committee for introduction of the bill. Due to the increased role the libraries have begun to play during the pandemic, we need the additional funding that this bill is proposing. Today, our language teachers are teaching remotely from the library, and the GEO bond fund pays for internet access for this extremely important access for our students. Tools such as ebooks, audiobooks, laptops, GED classes are continuing to be in a more greater demand, all the more reason for the additional requested funding. This semester, I'm able to mentor a library sciences graduate student from USC, and she's going to be extremely helpful to me as we're very short-staffed. Zoom, Google Classroom, GoToMeet are such a very huge part of our services, which enable us to help ourselves during the staff shortages with having help outside virtually. Many of our schools don't have libraries, and tribal libraries serve as the school's library. Parents with kids at home continue to need print resources even more as we outreach through curbside services. The use of technology played by libraries positively impacts not only tribal students, but all families near our library, all people who live near our public tribal library. And we've been using our funding for devices, high-speed internet printing for college students, subscription services, Canopy, newspaper subscriptions, such as the New York Times is something new that we've been able to provide via our website. We will continue to reconstruct our website and offer through Weebly and offer new resources. We have purchased ABC Teach Scholastic Teachables for our families, which is extremely important because families at home need to have additional materials for things that the classrooms don't provide, skill practice, keeping learning fun at home. Also, we would like to start putting our registration card on our website for remote checkout and purchasing Kapira mobile app, which would allow better access to our library from anywhere. So I just thought I would mention these resources that are so very important to our public tribal library. And I'm right there with y'all. And I'm not, I mean, you know, I know this sounds like a lot of strategizing and I'm not all that great because I was really getting into the in-person thing the last couple of years. I mean, pre-pandemic, I was getting good at that, but now it's a whole different thing and I'm short staffed. So I just thank everybody for all the efforts that are being done, like the chocolates. That's a big deal. Thank you, guys.
Alana?
Yes, I just wanted
Thank you, Teresa.
Yes, thanks, Teresa. And thanks for all the other tribal library directors who are online here. But this has been a process that's been going on since I first became involved with tribal libraries in 1976. And the construction piece is so critical because the GO bond funds have been really important to provide equipment and materials for patrons. But because these facilities are so small and out of date, it's very difficult to provide the kind of services and have the place to have your collection if your facility is so wanting. And the other thing I just wanted to mention is that it's been very inspiring to me that the tribal leadership in the state of New Mexico has consistently supported their tribal libraries and identified them early on as essential to the infrastructure in their communities. And I think this is, it's so important as a model for the whole of the state of New Mexico that the tribal leadership over all these years have identified their tribal libraries as such an important part of their communities. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Alana. Could one of you introduce Regis? He didn't tell us who he was, and some of our audience may not know that.
Regis
describe
Pecos,
what his position is.
Regis Pecos is with the Tribal Education Alliance in regard to advocating for tribal libraries and language programs, et cetera. But he's with the Santa Fe Indian School Leadership Institute, has been an important tribal leader, former governor of Cochiti, and an advocate for education and tribes throughout the state. Do you want to, if anybody else wants to add anything else about Regis, feel free to jump in.
I just want to add that, you know, again, he's been such a great advocate for tribal libraries and, you know, in advocating among tribal leaders, the needs that the tribal libraries play in the overall education of our students of all ages and our families as well. So he's a very wonderful asset for our state of New Mexico.
I think Regis has, Regis was the one who got Speaker Lujan to include a special, a distinct segment of the GO bond for tribal libraries in 2010. And he's been an inspiration to the Native American Library Special Interest Group all through these years, and has worked with tribal governors and leaders to say, you've got these libraries, they're under-resourced, they could be doing so much more, and you need to get them on your list, particularly capital outlay, since you've been in, you've got libraries, but you're in buildings that were never built specifically to be libraries. And now, not only do they have money for planning, they have an architect named Elizabeth Swina of Cochiti Pueblo, who is actually sitting at the table and has some feel now for what goes into a tribal library, a 21st century tribal library that she can bring to tribal governments. So it's been an exciting year to watch this build. And so Representative Derek Lente's House Bill 89 on construction was heard. House Bill 88, which is the program money, will be heard. And so there we are. And that's the third big item that we were working on, in addition to the Rural Library Endowment and the GO bond issue, which is our first priority. So coming to the end, last but not least, is Eli Ganay, our state librarian. And we will we'll take questions after Eli's presentation, and that's our program. So go ahead, Eli.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks, everyone. Good to see everyone. I apologize that Greg Geisler wasn't able to be here. So I'll just kind of give a brief update from the department. The State Library is in the Department of Cultural Affairs. The priorities of the department this year as a whole, funding for the Vladam Contemporary, which is making great progress. Funding for a History Day program, Arts in the Military, additional operational costs for museum and historic sites, and Southern Facilities Manager and Assistants. The library piece of that, we've requested a 5.3% increase from FY22 overall. LFC is supporting 2.7% increase. Excuse me. And that includes $100,000 increase to state grants and aid. The Cabinet Secretary, Deborah Garcia Igrego, is sorry that she couldn't make it here today. This is a pretty busy time of year for her, but I meet with her regularly. She's a big fan of libraries. She loves bookmobiles, and she's a great supporter of all that you do. So I'll pass on her thanks and well wishes to you all. All right, turning to some library specific stuff. I've made some notes and I'll see if I can hit all of these points. I want to start with GO bond. So GO bond for 2018, the 2018 GO bond, there's still $1.6 million on the table for non-tribal public libraries, 674% on the table for tribal public libraries. I don't have the numbers for the other library types. But I think it's good to remember when you think about meeting with legislators and providing them information on how you use your GO bonds and why it doesn't all get spent up front. Keep in mind that they are looking at those numbers. Those are numbers that we report regularly to the LFC. So they have those numbers in front of them. They know when they're making decisions on how much money to give to you all. And in my mind, they probably think of libraries as one big thing. They're not parsing out the different library types. When they see a lot of money on the table, it can make them think that maybe they don't need to provide a lot of GO bonds. So the other piece of that is, it's easy, as we all know, for people to take a reductionist attitude towards what a library is and to see libraries in very simple terms, but you are very complex in what you do. There is a lot of nuance to the work that you do and how you make incredibly big impacts to your communities. But we you know, we are always, all of us in the library community, needing to always tell those stories, get face to face with the people who make decisions, and make sure that they're hearing all the nuance and all the great stories behind that. So I'll just echo what I've heard others say, which is that it is incredibly important with complex and very important things like GeoBond that every legislator gets the information they need to make good decisions. And that's got to take, you know, a whole New Mexico library universe effort. So would encourage you again to make sure that between sessions, legislators are provided with information about GeoBond, how you're using it, and why it is that you know, a bond from 4 years ago, 2018, still has millions of dollars on the table, right? So there's a lot of complexity there. Don't try to treat it as too simple of a problem. It takes, you know, nuance, and you all have a ton of great stories, but you've got to actually go talk to people and tell them those stories. All right, GeoBond. Couple other things in no particular order. Broadband. Broadband is a big deal these days. There's a lot of money on the table. We still have about $700,000 left in our library broadband infrastructure fund to support tribal and public libraries. We'll be looking to extend the life of that fund. And we are at the point where we have reached most of the libraries we can reach in terms of basic fiber builds. There's a couple more we need to get to, I think. But in the future, there's going to be a lot more work from that fund on updating category 2 equipment, if you know what that means. That's the internal networking equipment. And providing a higher level of consultant support to you all so that the process is just really regular and easy. So we've got, you know, some plans for shifting gears from sort of phase 1 into a long-term phase 2 for that library broadband fund. I'm on the Broadband Council for New Mexico. The way I view my role on that council is to make sure I'm advocating for digital equity. So that's kind of my focus on that council. There's a lot of really smart people who spend much more time thinking about broadband than me. And as I've said, we are doing pretty good with what we are able to do with libraries. The piece that, the hurdle we always face is that our fund can be used for the infrastructural piece, but ongoing maintenance, equipment, digital training, everything else that goes into digital equity, there's still some big gaps. So that's kind of my focus. I would encourage you, if you have, if you're following the broadband council stuff, if you have any general thoughts on broadband, please reach out to me directly and we can talk about it. Not sure if anyone's mentioned it yet. There's $10 million was given to tribal construction and broadband second special session last year, and on the table now is an additional 10 million. That money is going to PED, but it's being transferred to IAD. We don't really deal with construction at the state library. On rare occasions we have, but generally we don't. IAD deals with construction, so that money is going to Indian Affairs. And we are working closely with them to figure out what that looks like exactly, how that money actually gets allocated, what the priorities are. We're in the process of developing what a board would be that would help make those decisions. So my staff and myself are going to be very closely involved in that process. So more on that. Shell gave a great update on the Rural Library Endowment, and he always speaks very eloquently about libraries, and I always appreciate hearing Shell talk. So thank you, Shell. An update on our end on the endowments. we've made the decision to roll over the funds generated for this year into next year. There were $83,000 of funds generated this year, which would equate to about $1,500 per library. That's considered by some to be too low to be worth the administration costs of it. This is a year where those same libraries are getting ARPA funds of at least 17,000. So we're going to roll over that funding. The other issue I'll just mention is that our NMAC has hit some hurdles. We need an NMAC, an administrative code in place to be able to give out that money, and we're having some delays. Nothing major, but the NMAC is not in place. So rather than give it to you at the last minute and ask you to spend it really quickly, we're going to roll it over. Next year is an estimated, 150,000 is what's estimated to be raised from the endowment next year. So we're going to combine those two, and the payout will be, instead of 1,500, it'll be about 4,600 by my calculation next year. That's very much an estimate, but that's what's happening with that. And that's if the extra 10 million or the extra 20 million does not get added. So I think it was already said there's 10 million of ARPA funds being suggested by the LFC. If that gets in, there will be an additional amount. The fund right now is about 3.3 million, so it would be 13.3. And then should the bill that Senator Ortiz-Pino is carrying also get passed, or if that funding got picked up somewhere, then that would be 23.3. So a lot of unknowns with the endowment, but we'll keep you updated as much as we can on that. Okay, have I said everything that I wanted to say? Just a second, please.
There may be some questions in the chat. I think I saw a couple that might be in your list. Lynette, do you, or go ahead.
One more thing before I open it up. I don't know, has anyone been watching House Joint Resolution 1, which includes exemptions to the Constitution for anti-donation? Is that something that's on anyone's radar? It looks to me like that might have implications both for broadband and for libraries. Shell, are you on top of that?
Yes, I've been following that bill. Right now, there's something with the House bill and Senate bill being put together because they're real similar. It was two different bills. I believe that it's going to be SJR 1, Senate Joint Resolution 1. I'm not 100% sure about that, but it will impact. There are 13 501c3 libraries, and it will probably impact about 11 of them. A couple of the libraries are in county buildings, so it's not important to them. So it will also impact future libraries that start in small towns. I know Ojosarco is trying to start a library. It would probably impact them. So yes, advocating for the change. It will be a constitutional amendment that will be up on the next ballot if the joint resolution passes. So advocating for that would be really helpful.
Alana has her hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to make an additional comment that we forgot to mention. I just wanted to clarify for everyone that the tribal libraries are public libraries, full public libraries in the state. They have to meet the same standard to be a recognized public library as any other public library, and they serve all members of the adjoining communities as well as those in the tribal community. So a number of our libraries are serving people who are not members of the tribe per se, but they're public libraries, so they're serving the public.
Right, right.
I have noted the comments on the side, and I'll do some research on my end. The Bond C in the GeoBond bill does talk about tribal schools, but it does appear to be all the tribal colleges. I haven't looked through it carefully, but there might be some restriction on the BIE schools, but I can help you all look into that as well. Any other questions for me? Feel free to reach out to me anytime, obviously. Thank you for all you do. This has been, last couple of years have been very tough. So I appreciate all that everyone has done to continue to move your communities forwards and meet the needs. And I have the opportunity to talk to a lot of librarians and library directors about what it's meant to be a librarian in the pandemic. And it's very inspiring. You all have gone above and beyond. So hang in there. I appreciate you, and your communities appreciate you, and keep up the good work.
Great. And Dean, you have a comment?
I just wanted to say we've heard from a whole lot of people who are doing a lot of amazing work, all of it volunteer, to advocate for libraries. And much of that work is being done through the New Mexico Library Association, through the New Mexico Consortium of Academic Libraries, and also through the New Mexico Municipal Librarians Association. And if you aren't involved in some of those organizations, please think about it. For NMLA, we've got all sorts of traditional positions like secretary and member at large. There are 14 different standing committees, from everything from awards to fundraising, intellectual freedom, and legislation. And there are 12 different special interest groups that you can be a part of or be a chair of, everything from the basics about different types of libraries like public, native, academic, and school, to focused subjects such as digital collections, fundraising, local history. So there's lots of ways to get involved, and none of this would be happening if it wasn't for the volunteers who are part of that organization. And I was also going to introduce, but he's had to leave us, Peter Broomberg was sitting in with us from Every Library. And although, you know, we do a really good job of advocating for our libraries here in the state of New Mexico, we are partnering with Every Library, as they are a national organization that supports grassroots efforts. And so they're in here to help us even leverage more out of our grassroots advocacy for libraries. And so I'm sorry he didn't get to say hello. He had to go off to another meeting. And but you probably saw him with his lovely black cat passing by once in a while across the screen there.
Thank
you, Dean, for that wrap up. And I think that concludes our program. Lynette, go ahead.
I just want to stress again, also the New Mexico Municipal League, the public librarians have a committee, library committee within there. And we're the ones that work very hard to get the legislation through. And if it wasn't for us, you'd all be scrambling. So I've stepped down as I've retired. So I'll be joining Joe's club. Dean is past president, Margaret's incoming president, and Eileen Sullivan's going to be filling in for me. But public librarians, it's a shout out. We do need your support to continue to offer this wonderful legislation that goes for all types of libraries. So.
Okay, thank you all. This concludes our legislative day orientation, and we'll be keeping in touch through the legislative bulletin. And thank you all for joining us. Good day.
Thank you, Joe. Good to see everyone.